The long road home seemed to go on and on. The road continued to outstretch the front of the vehicle endlessly. The light that shone through the branches of the tall green trees danced across the window of random patterns, every once in a while obnoxiously shining in your eyes. The surrounding was of full, deep green trees forming a forest around the road. The only sound was the sound of car's engine as it traveled down the path. It was peaceful and let off a serene feeling. Although the ride seemed like a nice one, it lacked every from of nice for both passengers. The middle-aged woman behind the steering wheel had neat, short brown hair that fit her complexion quite well. She wore a green V-neck t-shirt and a pair of blue jeans, diamond stud earrings decorated with each ears, which partially shone from behind her haircut. She had deep green eyes, which were brought out by her shirt. The lighting seemed to make them more noticeable. There wasn't much significance to her appearance. She just looked at any average mother that you see on TV shows and such. But one thing's for sure made her differ from those average mothers, and that was the dark bags under her eyes. Her facial expression was gloomy and sad, although she generally looked like the one she smiled a lot. She would sniffle every once in a while and occasionally glance back at the rearview mirror to look back at her son in the back seat, who was hunched over partially, his arms held tight around his neck and chest, and his head pressed against the cold window. The boy lacked of any normal appearance. Anyone could blankly see that something was wrong with him. With his messy brown hair went in every which way, and his pale, almost gray skin was brought out by the luminescent lighting. His eyes were dark. Unlike his mother's, he wore a white t-shirt and scrub pants that had been provided to him by the hospital. The clothes he had worn before were so shredded and blood-stained that they weren't wearable anymore. The right side of his face bared a new cuts, along with his split eyebrow. His right arm was bandaged up all the way up to his shoulder, which had been shredded when his right arm side had hit the shattered glass. His injuries appeared to be painful, when really he couldn't feel a thing. He could never feel a thing. That was just one thing of the glories about him. One of the many challenges he had to face growing up. Growing up with a rare disease that caused him to be completely numb towards pain. Never before he had felt himself get hurt. He could have lost an arm and felt nothing, and that other major disorder he had faced was the one that deemed in him many insulting nicknames in the short time he attended grade school. Before he was moved to homeschooling as his Tourette's syndrome, which caused him to tick and twitch in ways he couldn't control. He would crack his neck uncontrollably and twitch every once in a while. The kids would tease him and call him Ticci-Toby and mock him with exaggerated twitching and laughing. It got so bad he turned to homeschooling. It was too hard for him to be in a common learning environment with seemingly every kid poking or more like stabbing fun at him. Toby stared blankly out the window, his face empty of any depictable emotion. And every few minutes his shoulder, arm, or foot would twitch. Every bump that the car tires hit made his stomach turn. Toby Rogers was the boy's name, and the last time Toby remembered riding a car was when it crashed. That's what he thought all about, unconsciously replaying everything that he had remembered before he blacked out over and over again. Toby had been the lucky one, when his sister hadn't been so lucky. When the thought of his older sister came, he couldn't help but let his eyes begin to tear up. The horrible memories replayed in his mind, her screaming that had been cut off when the front of the car was smashed in. It all went blank for a moment before Toby opened his eyes to see his sister's body. Her forehead pierced with glass shards, her hips and legs were crushed under the force of the steering wheel, her torso pushed from the late inflated airbag. This was the last thing he'd ever seen of his dear older sister. The road home continued on for what seemed like forever. It took so long to get home due to his mother wanting to avoid passing the site of the crash. When the surrounding gave into a familiar neighborhood, they had been more than ready to get out of the car and step back into their own home. It was an older neighborhood with quaint little houses all next to each other. The car drove in the front of the little house. with white window planes. They had both quickly noticed the old vehicle that was parked in front of the house and the familiar figure who stood out into the driveway. Toby felt an automatic anger and frustration to overtake him at the sight of his father who wasn't there. His mother pulled the car up to the driveway beside him before turning off the engine and preparing to step out to face her husband. "Why is he here?" Toby asked quietly as he looked at the back of his mother, who reached to open the car door. "He's your father, Toby. He's here because he wants to see you." His mother responded with monotone voice, trying to sound less shaky. Yet he couldn't have driven up to the hospital to see Lyra before she died. Toby narrowed his eyes out the window. "He was drunk that night, honey. He couldn't drive. Yeah, when he is not." Toby then pushed open the door before his mother stumbled out onto the driveway, where he met his father's gaze before looking down at his feet with a stern expression. His mother stepped out behind him and met her husband's eyes before walking around the car. His father opened up his arms, expecting a hug from his wife, but she walked past him and put an arm around Toby's shoulder and influenced him to begin walking inside. "Connie," her husband began to say under a raspy voice. "What, no welcome home hug, huh?" She ignored her husband's obnoxious words and walked past him with her son under her arm. "Say, he's 16, he can walk by himself." His father began to follow them. "He's 17, Connie glared back at him, before opening the door to the house and stepping inside. "Toby, why don't we get in your room to rest, okay? I'll come get you when dinner's ready." "No, I'm 16, I can walk by myself," Toby said sarcastically, and glared back at his father before stumbling upon the small staircase and turning into his room, where he slammed the door violently. His little room didn't have much in it, just a small bed, a dresser, a window, and its walls had a few framed pictures of his family, back when they were a family, before his father became an alcoholic and acted violently towards the rest of the family. Toby remembered when he was arguing with his mother, and he grabbed her by the hair and shoved her into the floor, and when Lyra tried to break it up, he pushed her and he hit her back at the corner of the kitchen counter. Toby would never forgive him for what he did to his mother and sister. Never. Toby didn't care much about his father beat him down. He couldn't feel it anyway. What he did care about was he intentionally hurt the two people he cared about. And when he was waiting in the hospital where his older sister took her last few breaths, the only person who didn't rush there was his dad. Toby stood there at the window and looked out onto the street. He could have sworn he saw things out of the corner of his eye, but quickly blamed it on the medication he had been put on. When dinner time had come around and his mother called up to him, Toby came down the stairs as he hesitantly sat down at the table across from his father, and in between his mother and an empty chair. It was quiet as his parents picked at their food, but Toby refused to eat. Instead, he just watched his dad with a blank stare. His mother caught onto his stare towards his father and elbowed him slightly. Toby looked over at her slightly and looked down at his uneaten food, which he didn't touch. Toby lay in bed. He pulled his covers up to his head and stared out the window. He was tired, but there was no way he would fall asleep. He couldn't. There was too much to think about. He had been debating on whether or not to follow his mother's directions and forgive his father or continue holding a grudge with his boiling hatred. He heard his door creak open and his mother padded into the room and sat down on the bed next to him. She reached over and rubbed his back, which he had been turned to her. "I know it's hard, Toby. Trust me, I understand. I promise you it will get better," she said softly. "When is he going to leave?" Toby asked with innocent in his shaky voice. Connie let her gaze fall to their feet. "I don't know, honey. He's staying as far as I know," she replied. Toby didn't respond. He just continued to look forward at the wall, holding his damaged arm near his chest. After a few minutes of silence, his mother sighed, before she leaned in to kiss his cheek and stood up to walk out of the room. "Good night," she said, as she closed the door. The hours passed slowly, and Toby couldn't quit tossing and turning. Every time he let his imagination take over, he heard screeching of tires, screaming of his sister, and he could uncontrollably jerk in bed. He threw off his covers laying on his back. He pulled his pillow over his face and cried into it. He could feel his chest rise and fall as he let out each shaky breath as he cried. He could hear his own pitiful weeping. He could have been screaming and crying. if he didn't press his pillow over his face. After a few minutes, he threw the pillow on his face, as well as sat up and hunched over, holding his head and breathing roughly. Tears streaming down from his eyes, he couldn't help but cry. He tried to keep it in, but he couldn't help. With the whine and whimper, he had just sat there shaking. He inhaled before he stood up, and walked around his bed to the window and peered out, taking deep breaths in to try to calm him down. He rubbed his eyes and looked out of the group of small pine trees across the street. He stopped suddenly, his gaze slowly centered on something standing under the street light. He heard a bell ringing in his ears, and he couldn't look away. The figure stood beside the street light, about 2 feet shorter than it. Long arms draped around the sides as it stared up at him with non-existing eyes. The figure had no features whatsoever. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, yet it held Toby's hypnotized stare, seemingly peering into his very being. The ringing of his ears grew louder and louder each second. He stared, before suddenly it all went black. The next morning, Toby woke in his bed. It felt different. He wasn't tired at all, and when he was consciously woke up, it felt like he had been lying there, awake for hours. He had no thoughts following through his mind. He sat up slowly and stumbled over to the wall, but when he stood up, he automatically felt dizzy. He stumbled into the doorway and walked down the stairs. His parents were sitting on the table. His father was tuned in with the small TV and sat on the countertop, and his mother was reading the newspaper. She quickly looked over when she felt Toby's presence looming behind her. "Well, good morning, sleepyhead. You've been sleeping forever." She greeted him with a hesitated smile. Toby slowly looked over at the back of the clock and noticed that it was 12:38 p.m. "I made you breakfast, but it got cold. I was going to wake you, but I felt you needed sleep." Her expression fell from happy to worried as her sons resisted responding to her. "Are you all right?" Toby stumbled over and sat by his father. He felt as if he was on idle and had no control over his actions. He was seeing everything he did, but didn't seem to register his brain properly. He reached out to his father's arm, but his hand ended up getting slapped. His father turned him abruptly and pushed his chair over with his foot. "Don't touch me, boy," he yelled. His mother stood up. "All right, knock that off. That is the last thing we need." Days went by, and things continued on as they were. Connie spent most of her time cleaning up the house, and her rude husband spent most of his time ordering her around. It was just how it used to be before the crash. Toby never left his room. He would sit by his bed and tremble. His mind would wander, but his thoughts changed so fast to be remembered. He would pace around his small bedroom like a caged animal, or stare out his window. The unhealthy cycle continued. Connie continued to be pushed around by her husband, being way too submissive to him, and Toby remained in his room. Before he could think twice, he would begin to chew on his hands, tearing the flesh from his fingers. He would gnaw on his hands until they bled. When his mother walked in on him while he was doing so, she reacted horribly. She rushed him downstairs and grabbed the first aid kit, wrapping his hands in it. She demanded that he wouldn't leave her side from then. He isolated himself so much that he grew into hate being around others. His memory grew glitchy as well. He started missing memories of minutes, hours, days, and so on. He would begin talking nonsense about things completely unrelated to the conversation he would have. He'd go off about seeing things, sharks in his sink as he washed dishes, hearing crickets in his pillows, and seeing ghosts outside his bedroom window. All the nonsense landed him in the counselor's office. His mother grew too anxious about his mental health. She decided it would be good for him to talk to a professional about what he was feeling. Connie walked Toby into the building, holding his hand and guiding him. She walked up to him to the front of the desk and began talking to the lady who sat behind it. "Miss Rogers?" the lady asked. "Yes, that's me," Connie nodded. "We're here to see a Dr. Oliver. I'm here with Toby Rogers." "Yes, right this way." The lady stood up and led them down a long hallway. Toby looked at the framed artwork drawn on the walls and tuned to the sound of the lady's high heels on the hard floor. She opened the door with a room with a table and 2 chairs. "If we can get him to sit there for a few minutes, I'll get the doctor." She smiled and held the door open. Toby stumbled into the room and sat down on the table. He looked over at his mother and this lady before the door slowly shut behind him. He looked around the room before he held up his tightly bandaged hands and began to bite at the bandages to unwrap his hands, but was interrupted as the door swung open and a young woman in a black and white spotted dress with light blonde hair stepped in, holding a clipboard and pen. "Toby?" she asked with a smile. Toby looked up at her and nodded. "Nice to meet you, Toby. My name is Dr. Oliver." She put her hand out for him to shake, but hesitantly pulled away when she noticed his bandaged hands. "Oh," she smiled nervously, before clearing her throat and sitting on the chair across from the table from them. "So I'm going to ask you a few questions. Try to answer them as honestly as possible, okay?" She placed the clipboard down on the table. Toby nodded slowly and held his restrained hands on his lap. "How old are you, Toby?" she asked. 17, he responded quietly. She wrote down on the paper that was clipped to the clipboard. "What is your full name?" "Toby Aaron Rogers." "What is your birthday?" "April 28th. "Who is your immediate family?" Toby paused for a moment before answering her question. "My mom, my dad, and—" He stopped. "My sister." "I heard about your sister, dear. I'm really sorry." Her expression fell into a sad, pity-filled look. Toby nodded. "Do you remember anything from the crash, Toby?" Toby looked away from her. His mind went blank for a moment. He looked down on his lap and the surrounding. He heard a faint ringing sound. His eyes widened as he froze in place. "Toby?" the counselor asked. "Toby, are you listening?" Toby felt a shiver go down his spine until he froze once again, and slowly looked over the little window through the door. There he saw it, the dark, featureless figure peering at him. He stared, eyes widened, the ringing growing louder and louder until it suddenly, by the loud voice of the counselor, broke his trance. "Toby!" she yelled. Toby jumped and fell sideways off his chair and back up to the corner. Dr. Oliver stood up, holding her clipboard to her chest, a surprised look in her eyes. Toby met her eyes again, his breath hitching as he twitched. That night Toby laid in bed, his eyes dazed as he stared straight up at the ceiling. He could feel himself begin to doze off, when he heard the scattering of footsteps down the hallway. He sat up and looked towards the doorway, his door wide open. There was no light. Everything was lit by the luminescent blue glow from the moon through his window, leaving a cold lighting. He stood up and slowly made his way towards the doorway, when suddenly the door, which was previously wide open, slammed in his face. He gasped and fell back. He was out of breath when he hit the ground, and he began breathing heavily, his eyes wide open. He waited for a few seconds before getting back up on his feet. He reached down and grasped the cold door handle with his bandaged hand and creaked it open. He looked out into the dark hallway and tiptoed out of his room. The window at the end of the hallway lit up the darkness. With blue moonlight, he padded his way down. He could hear the footsteps rustling around him, the faint giggling led by the pitter-patter of small feet, which sounded like a child run in front of him, giggling and running around. The hallway was a lot longer than he had remembered. It seemed endless, like the ride home from the hospital. He heard the door creak in front of him. "Mom?" he called out in a shaky voice. Suddenly a door slammed behind him and he jumped and turned around. Behind him he heard a long, eerie groan from behind him that sounded like a croak to his ear. He turned around as fast as he could and was suddenly face to face with none other than his dead sister. Her eyes were clouded white, her skin pale, and right the side of her jaw only dangling by its tissue and muscle, glass and protruding from her forehead, and black blood leaking down her face. Her blonde hair pulled back up in the ponytail as it always was, wearing the gray t-shirt and athlete shorts, which were dirty and spotted with blood. Her legs were bent in ways they shouldn't be. She stood emanating a long croaking noise, only an inch away from Toby's face. Toby yelped and fell back. "Ah!" He then started to crawl backwards away from her, not able to break the eye contact he held with her. Blank and dead eyes. He dragged himself backwards until he backed up into something. He stopped for a second. Everything was dead silent except for the heavy breathing and crying. He slowly looked up and met the blank face of a tall, dark figure that stood over him. Behind the dark, tall mask were rows of children, looking ranged from 3 to 10 years old. Their eyes completely black, and dark black blood leaked from their eye sockets. He screamed and stood up as fast as he could, only to be tripped by the dark black tendrils that wrapped around his ankle. He fell straight onto his stomach and got the wind knocked out of his chest. He tried to scream, but he couldn't make a sound. He wheezed out before it went black. Toby woke up with a start. He screamed and sat up as fast as he could, completely short out of breath. He wheezed out and he held his chest with his bandaged hands. It was just a dream. Just a dream. He lay back down on his bed and rolled over onto his side. He felt like a giant weight had been lifted off his chest as he took in deep breaths. He stood and padded over to his window. He saw nothing. Nobody was out there. No ghosts, no figures, nothing. He heard the rustling and coughing of his father in the doorway. His door was closed. He walked over and opened it, looking out into the hallway once again. He padded down the hallway and into the kitchen where he had found his dad standing and having a smoke in their living room. Toby waited a second and watched him from around the corner before burning the feeling started deep in his chest. Deep boiling anger overtook him. He heard the little imaginary voices in his head. "Do it! Do it! Do it!" they chanted. He turned away from his held arms. He felt like he actually had control of himself, unlike he did in the past few weeks since he got home from the hospital. He actually had complete thoughts for moments before they were clouded by the chanting of little voices in his head. "Kill him! He wasn't there! He wasn't there! Kill him! Kill him!" Faye continued on. Toby trembled. No, he wasn't going to do it. What? Was he going crazy? No, he won't kill anyone. He can't. He hated his father, but there was no way he was going to kill him. That was it. The last thoughts he had before he fell into idle state once again. The influence of the voice in his head was too much. He began to silently walk up behind his father. He reached over the counter to the knife holder in the kitchen and pulled out the largest knife that had been resting on the case. He gripped it in his hand and he felt the sensation choke over his chest. He let out a snicker. He began laughing so hard he had to gasp to breathe. His father turned around abruptly before he felt the brute force shove him down the floor. He grunted as the air escaped the knocked out of him. "What?" He looked up at the boy, who stood over him, grasping the kitchen knife in hand. "Toby, what are you doing?" He turned to sit up and put his arms out in front of him in self-defense, but before he knew it, Toby was on top of him. He went to grab at his neck, but his father reached down and blocked his hand by grabbing onto his wrist. "Stop! Get off of me, you little fucker!" he yelled with his other hand, and he threw an off-center punch towards Toby's shoulder. But he didn't stop. He looked in Toby's eyes and was not sane. It looked as if a demon had taken control over him. He yelled back and went to stab the knife into his father's chest, but he blocked him and grabbed onto his wrist once again. He went to shove him back, but Toby kicked him out of his feet, one in front of him, and landed a hard blow straight to the face. His father recoiled and pulled his arms away to cuff his face, but Toby got back up and drove the knife straight into his shoulder. His father let out a loud cry and went to pull the knife out, but before he could, Toby threw his fist straight into his face. He began to pound his fists into his head, laughing and wheezing. He cracked his neck and grabbed the knife and ripped it out of his shoulders. He drove it deep into his dad's chest and he repeatedly stabbed into his torso, blood spilling out and getting splattered everywhere. He didn't stop until his father's body went still. He threw the knife over his side and leaned over at his body, coughing and panting. He stared at his smashed face and just stood there twitching, until a loud scream broke the silence. He looked over to see his mother standing a few feet away, covering her mouth and tears streaming down her eyes. "Toby!" she screamed. "Why did you do that?" she cried. "Why?" she screamed. Toby stood up and began to back away from his father's bloody corpse. He began to back out of the kitchen and looked down at the blood-soaked bandages in his hands and looked up at his mother one last time before he turned and ran out of the house. He ran into the garage and slammed his head against the control panel of the wall and pushed the button to open the garage door. Before he ran out of his father's 2 hatchets that had been hanging on the tool rack above the table. And of course, full of jars, he filled to the brim with old rusted nails and screws. One hatchet was new. It had a bright orange handle and a shiny blade. The other was an old with a wooden handle and an old dull blade. He grabbed both and looked down at the table, and his eyes met with a box of matches, and under the table was a red gasoline tank. He held both the hatchets in one hand and grabbed the matches and gasoline before running out of the garage, down the hall driveway, and up the street. As he approached the street light that he could see out of his own bedroom window, he heard police sirens in the distance. He turned around and the red-blue flashing lights came rushing down the street. Toby stood for a second before pulling open the cap of the gasoline tank and ran down the street, spilling gasoline all over the street after him, and he turned to run into the trees. He poured the last bit of gasoline out before he reached into his pockets and pulled out a match. He struck it against a box and immediately dropped it. In an instant, flames burst around him. The fire caught onto the trees and bushes around him, and before he knew it, he was surrounded by the fire. The silhouettes of police cars were visible through the flames as he backed away into the forest surrounding him. He looked around, but his vision was blurred. His heart was pounding, and he closed his eyes for a moment. This was it. This was the end. Toby felt a hand on his shoulder. He opened his eyes and looked over to see a large white hand with long bony fingers that rested on his shoulder. He followed the arm that was attached to the hand up towering the dark figure. It appeared to be wearing a dark black suit, and its face was completely blank. It towered over Toby's small frame, and it looked down on him. Tendrils reached out from its back. Before Toby knew it, his vision blurred, and he was surrounded by the ringing of his ears. Everything went blank. That was it. That was the end. That was how Toby Rogers died. A few weeks later, Connie sat in her sister's kitchen. Her sister Lori sat next to her drinking a cup of coffee. About 3 weeks ago, Connie lost her husband and her son, and a few weeks before, she had lost her daughter to the car crash. Since then, she moved in with her sister. The police were keeping her busy, and they had just finished cleaning up the case, and the story had been released 2 weeks ago, and the focus on the world seemed to have shifted completely. News stories. Lori switched the TV to news broadcasts. On the TV, the news reporter began introducing the new headline. We have breaking news. Last night there's been a reported murder of 4 individuals. There are no suspects yet. The victims were a group of middle school kids who had been out in the woods late last night. The kid had been bludgeoned and stabbed to death. The investigators had discovered a weapon at the crime scene, which appears to be an old, dull-bladed hatchet. As you can see here in the picture that changed to show snapshots of the weapon, exactly was left on the crime scene. The investigators pulled out the name of the possible suspect, Toby Rogers, a 17-year-old boy who, a few weeks ago, had stabbed his father to death and tried to cover up his escape by setting a fire in the streets in the forest area and around the neighborhood. Although they believe the young boy had died there, the investigators suspect that Rogers may still be alive due to the fact that his body was never found.
What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, stay pretty.